This revision session is all about visual organisers, and it's a really useful method of revision if you like to learn by visual means. I'm going to go through what visual organisers are. I'll give you a few examples and give you some tips on how to get started during this session. The reason that visual organisers are such a good method of revision is because it's trying to get away from the more traditional method of reading through lots and lots of notes and writing lots and lots of things. It is a really good method of looking at things visually, putting things in order, and avoiding other methods. It works really well with other methods, so I'm not saying that you shouldn't do other methods instead. I'm saying that this is really good for some certain types of students who really like visual learning aids. There are a number of different ways you can do them. For example, recording key events, looking at chronology or putting things in chronological order, creating links between different components within your subject. There are lots of different ways to do them, and I'll go through a few examples so that you can see. One of the key points of it is that we do remember information better when we can visualize it in our mind. When we look at something, when we can close our eyes and we can visualize something, then it does help us to remember that even more. Now, here are 9 different examples of visual organisers. We have a Venn diagram, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, and that you should recognise from your GCSE maths work or from science work as well, but it's used in lots of different subjects. I'm going to talk about it in different subjects as well. We have 3 different methods of sequential thinking models. We have a step one, which shows the different events that happen and the detailed order of what happens on that first one. The second one is more of a hierarchy. So, for example, if you're looking at history, you might want to look at a family tree for the royal family or something like that. And the other one you've got is sort of a step-by-step. This happens, and this happens, and this happens in an order to show the different sequence of events. You have a chain diagram, and a chain diagram shows, again, in the same sort of way as a sequential thinking model, it shows what happens first, then what happens next, and what is the event of this. So what happens after this because of what happened before. I'm going to talk about the thinking at right angles one, because that one needs a bit of explaining. And then there's a few that you might find quite familiar. So you have a spider map, a web diagram, and a mind map. And these are ones which Rich would have talked about in a separate revision session. So there are 9 different models here, and I'm also going to go through a few that will be specialist for or really useful for students who've got special educational needs, but they're also really useful for any student. Here's an example. So Romeo and Juliet, and this is a book that I studied when I was your age for my GCSE in English. So this takes me back quite a lot to how when I was creating this to my younger days. And what a sequential model does for Romeo and Juliet is it shows the order of events. So if you can understand and you're able to put the different events in order that happen within Romeo and Juliet, or within Journey's End, or within other subjects that you have, it might be that you want to put the sequence in order for your computer science. What happens in the fetch, code, execute cycle could be used for this. It could be for a number of different things. It could be the different steps in a chemical reaction that take place. But that might be better for a chain diagram. But the example I'm going to give you is for Romeo and Juliet. So it starts, and this is me telling you the story of Romeo and Juliet in a very concise way that just goes through 15 different steps in a sequential model. So members of the Capulet and Montague households are caught fighting in the streets. Paris asks Lord Capulet for Juliet's hand in marriage, but Lord Capulet feels she is too young. Tybalt sees Romeo at the ball and is so offended that he vows to seek revenge. Romeo and Juliet meet at the ball. Romeo and Juliet declare their love for each other and talk about marriage. So these you can see as I'm going through is just a different step in the sequence. So thinking about the sequence of what happens within this story. Romeo visits Friar Lawrence and asks the friar to marry him and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet are married in secret. A fight breaks out between Romeo's friend Mercutio and Tybalt, but when Romeo tries to stop it, Mercutio is stabbed and dies. Romeo murders Tybalt and is banished. Juliet forgives Romeo. Paris proposes to Juliet, but Juliet refuses to marry him. Juliet apologizes to her father, and then she fakes her own death. Romeo finds Juliet and poisons himself, and the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues ends. Now, this is just a very simple example of the order of events that happen in Romeo and Juliet. You could, as more of a challenge for this, include a quote at each stage, so you know that there is a quote happening, or what the different quotes are for the different steps. It could be that you focus on a key term. For example, you could focus on love, and you show how love has changed throughout Romeo and Juliet, or fear, and how fear has developed over Romeo and Juliet, or something like that. Or you could have for Journey's End, you could have camaraderie or something like that, and you show the different steps within the story that lead to the end, from the beginning to the end, what happens there. Now, this is another example of a visual organizer called thinking at right angles. And this is broken down into two things. You have facts and you have opinions. So the facts are the things that we know, the things that have been proved and in science, and the opinions are what we believe about those facts and what we can interpret from them, but aren't necessarily factual. They're just our opinions of the matter. And an example of this is geography, climate change. So hopefully Joe can forgive me if I get this completely wrong. So facts, for example, on the geography climate change, that the average global temperatures have increased by more than 0.6 Celsius since 1950. Many of the world's glaciers and ice sheets are melting, and the average global sea levels has risen 10 to 20 centimetres in the past 100 years. So these are all facts that have been proved, and there's been lots of scientific research that's gone into proving these facts. So this is what we know about climate change. The opinions for those, we could say things like that companies are trying to manage climate change, with some doing more than others. We could say technology can improve climate change through growing renewable energy. And these are kind of based on fact, but they're all our opinions of what we think could be. So it's when you look at the facts for your topic, and then the opinions that go alongside it. The way to start using these kind of visual organizers is to pick one of these diagrams that makes sense to you. It could be one you've used before, it might be one that you haven't used before, it might be worth just experimenting and seeing what works with you and what doesn't. Then pick an area that you want to work on. So if there's a particular part of your geography work that you need to be working on, or your chemistry, or whatever it might be, select something that you can focus on, because you need to be organized before you can make this work. So pick something you want to focus on, and then pick the relevant visual organizer that you want to be using. As soon as you've done that, you can start to build it in whatever way works best for you. And it might be that it grows into something which isn't even on this list, and the work you do might change and might tweak and might develop, so it doesn't fit into any of these visual organizers. And if that's the case, then that's fine. But have a look and try different things, be creative and see what works. Make use of your knowledge organizers. These have got lots of really useful and really important information on that would help you. So use those to help you create these visual organizers, and keep referring back to them to make sure you got all the correct information there.